All right, let's jump right in. We're going to talk about one of the biggest empires in all of human history, a power that honestly seemed like it would last forever. But in the grand scheme of things, it vanished in the blink of an eye. This is the story of how the British Empire collapsed and how it happened so unbelievably fast.
I mean, just try to wrap your head around this for a second. At its absolute peak, the British Empire controlled about a quarter of the entire planet's land. A quarter! And it ruled over nearly a quarter of the world's population. It was a global superpower on a scale that nobody had ever seen before. So that brings us to the big question, right? How does something that massive, that powerful, just crumble in less than 50 years? Well, it wasn't one single thing. Turns out it was a perfect storm of different factors that brought the whole thing crashing down. Okay, so let's start with the first huge factor. The empire was basically rotting from the inside out. After fighting two incredibly brutal world wars, Britain itself was just broken and exhausted. This chart really tells the whole story, doesn't it? Before the wars, you've got Britain as this dominant, wealthy nation that other countries owed money to. But after World War II, it was totally exhausted, stretched way too thin, and drowning in debt, mostly to the United States. The wars might have saved the world, but they absolutely bankrupted the empire. And that gets us to the heart of the matter. You see, running a global empire costs a fortune. It takes a ton of money and military power. And after the wars, Britain just didn't have a surplus of either one. It literally couldn't afford to police the world and put down independence movements anymore. The will might have still been there for some, but the wallet was completely empty. So on top of being broke, Britain was also dealing with these huge new forces that were changing the world. The old era of European empires was over, and two brand new superpowers were starting to call the shots. And here's the really wild part. You've got these two new global powers, the United States and the Soviet Union, who are complete opposites, right? They were locked in the Cold War, but they both agreed on one thing. The old European empires had to go. Now, their reasons were totally different. The US wanted free trade and saw the empire as a closed economic club. The Soviet Union, on the other hand, was preaching that colonialism was just evil capitalism. So, poor Britain found itself squeezed from both sides. But the third pressure, and maybe the most powerful of all, wasn't coming from London or Washington or Moscow. Nope, it was coming from inside the colonies themselves. There was this unstoppable wave of people demanding their freedom. And you can't blame them. Think about it. Millions of soldiers from all over the empire had fought and died for Britain in two world wars. They felt like they had more than earned their independence. They were tired of being dragged into Europe's conflicts, tired of having no say in how they were governed. So after World War II, that feeling just exploded into powerful independence movements everywhere. So you've got this perfect storm brewing. Britain is weak at home, it's getting pushed around by the new superpowers, and its own colonies are rising up. The stage was set for a super fast and pretty much total collapse. Now, to really understand how it all fell apart, you have to understand India. They called it the jewel in the crown of the empire. It was the biggest, the most populated, and you could argue the most valuable of all the colonies. What happened to India would decide the fate of the entire empire. It was the linchpin. And this timeline just shows you the mind-boggling speed of it all. In 1945, the empire is still there, still whole. But just 2 years later, bam, 1947, India gains its independence. And that was the tipping point. After that, the dominoes just fell, one after the other, so fast. Over the next 2 decades, pretty much every colony followed suit. Until finally, in 1997, when Hong Kong was handed over, the British Empire was, well, it was history. So to pull it all together, it really was that perfect storm. You had a tired, broke Britain that couldn't pay the bills anymore. You had two new superpowers who both wanted the old empires gone. And you had an unstoppable call for freedom rising up from people all over the world. Put them all together and you have the recipe for how one of the biggest empires in history was dismantled in less than a single lifetime. And that leaves us with one last really big question to chew on. The fall of the British Empire left this huge power vacuum all across the globe. And if history teaches us anything, it's that vacuums like that, they don't stay empty for long. So it makes you wonder, when a global power falls apart that quickly, what or who rushes in to fill its place?